We start with the root. The word comes from the Greek demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. Historically, this combination terrified ruling elites. They viewed the prospect of rule by the uneducated masses as a threat to social order. Democracy emerged to dismantle that fear. It functions as a total rejection of the idea that any individual or any specific elite class possesses a natural inherent right to govern others. This diagram illustrates the two pillars supporting this rejection. First is popular sovereignty. The public is the ultimate source of political authority. Second is political equality, ensuring every individual's voice carries equal weight, regardless of their status or wealth. In ancient Athens, citizens realized these pillars through direct assemblies. They shaped their own laws in person. But the sheer size and complexity of modern states made this physical gathering impossible to maintain. We see rare remnants of this direct action today, like Switzerland's Landsgemeinde Day, where citizens gather in open-air assemblies to vote by a physical show of hands. Because massive populations cannot gather in a single square, humanity had to invent systems of representation. This birthed the competing theoretical models used to determine who actually holds the right to rule. Democracy is a spectrum of models, plotted here. The horizontal axis tracks goals. Procedural focuses on voting rules, while substantive prioritizes actual equality. The vertical axis maps the state. At the bottom, government threatens liberty. At the top, it's a tool for human development. By mapping every major political philosopher onto this grid, we can see exactly how they propose to organize power in the modern world. We begin in the bottom left with protective democracy. Early liberals like John Locke and Jeremy Bentham designed this model to maximize individual liberty. In this view, voting is a defensive shield, protecting private property and natural rights from government overreach. This model answers Aristotle's ancient question to Plato: who will guard the guardians? The solution is to keep state power strictly limited by the electorate. Developmental democracy sits in the top right quadrant. Rousseau advocated the general will, dismissing representation as a sham where citizens are enslaved after voting. Conversely, J.S. Mill proposed plural voting to protect informed debate from the tyranny of the majority. These theories split democracy's purpose: a shield to protect us or an engine for development. Liberal democracy relies on constitutional checks, but empirical theories look at actual power. Elite theory argues a small minority inevitably rules. Michels and Schumpeter saw this as competitive elitism, sidelining the public. Pluralists, however, view power as a web of competing interest groups. Robert Dahl described this as polyarchy, the system where power is dispersed among so many different groups that no single elite can establish a monopoly. However, Dahl later admitted a critical flaw. Extreme economic inequality destroys the political equality required for polyarchy to work. These empirical studies reveal that without strict safeguards, liberal democracy can easily become a battlefield where well-funded factions hijack the popular will. Marxist theory dismisses liberal democracy as a bourgeois illusion. It argues that formal rights at the ballot box mean nothing if they mask deep economic exploitation and social inequality in daily life. Karl Marx prioritized collective ownership and the dictatorship of the proletariat as a transitional step toward achieving actual substantive equality. Marx pointed to the 1871 Paris Commune as a model for authentic workers' democracy, where representatives were directly accountable to the people they served. But Lenin's implementation shifted the focus. He concentrated power in a vanguard party, claiming to act for the working class through centralized councils, or Soviets. This model utilized democratic centralism. It allowed for debate before a decision was made, but enforced absolute, unquestioning unity once the party leadership spoke. By dismantling institutional checks, this system created a fatal paradox. If the party holds all power, who is left to guard the party? The attempt to force economic equality through central control resulted in total authoritarianism, failing to honor the very popular sovereignty it claimed to represent. To fix these failures, 20th century theorists developed 4 new frameworks. These models seek to move beyond passive voting and toward active participation. Radical democracy, led by C.B. Macpherson, rejects the liberal view of citizens as isolated consumers in a political marketplace. McPherson distinguished between extractive power and developmental power, which is the human capacity for creative self-realization through cooperation. Deliberative democracy, championed by Jürgen Habermas, argues that legitimacy does not come from counting votes. It comes from the process of reasoned public discussion. In this model, the goal is mutual understanding. Participants must justify their positions to one another as equals to reach a genuine consensus. Participatory democracy demands that we bring these democratic habits into our daily lives, into our workplaces, schools, and local neighborhoods. By decentralizing power, this model aims to build civic competence, teaching citizens how to manage their own affairs rather than delegating them to distant elites. Finally, cosmopolitan democracy recognizes that in a globalized world, national governments alone cannot hold global corporations or environmental crises accountable. David Held argues democracy must scale to global institutions. If our lives are shaped by transnational forces, our democratic accountability must match that scale. These modern corrections prove that democracy's moral legitimacy depends on whether it fosters the creative freedom and active engagement of its people. Mastering these concepts require tracking how they were codified into a master bookshelf of political literature. We start with the classical bedrock, Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Politics, and Locke's two treatises. The Middle Era brought critiques of industry and power, Marx, Michels, and Schumpeter. For much of this history, these models completely excluded loaded minorities. These groups had to organize and fight to force the expansion of the very rights these theorists were debating. The map concludes with the modern response to global complexity, Habermas's Between Facts and Norms, and David Held's Democracy and the Global Order. We end with a modern warning. Fareed Zakaria identifies illiberal democracy, a state where the procedures of voting remain, but the substantive values of rights and the rule of law dissolve. This entire taxonomy of power leads to a single realization. John Dewey defined democracy as a mode of associated living. It is an ongoing project that survives only through the daily habits of cooperation and the active creative freedom of its people. It is not a static machine, but a life we choose to lead together.